is Stephanie. I am the Marketing Promotions Manager here at Boulder Bookstore, and it's finally time to do my birthday videos. So I'm going to do 2 videos, and for this one I'm going to talk about 5 books that I read obsessively when I was a kid. So I have to start with The Phantom Tollbooth. Here's my ratty old copy that's been read a million times. And part of the reason I have to start with this one is because when I first started at the store in 2006, this is the first book I attempted to write a recommendation for, and Liesl, who was the children's buyer then and still is the children's buyer, basically told me, everyone writes a rec for Phantom Tollbooth, you can't write a recommendation for Phantom Tollbooth. And I was very sad because I love this book. But you know, it doesn't really need a recommendation tag so much. But since this is my birthday video, I get to talk about whatever I want. So I'm talking about how much I love The Phantom Tollbooth. If you are unfamiliar with the story, it is the story of a young boy named Milo who is very bored with everything. School is lame and home is lame. Everything is lame. And he comes home one day and finds this package for him. And after following, he's bored, he has nothing else to do, so he guesses he'll open this package, and it's a toll booth. And so he, it's got instructions to put it all together, and and he's got like a little mechanical car, so he figures why not, he'll play with this thing. He sets up the toll booth, he sets up the signs, he gets in his car, he drives to the toll booth, and all of a sudden he's in a completely different place. He's in a magical land, and it is really the crux of the story is about his adventures in learning how to appreciate things and learning how to see things that he never really thought about before. Like thinking about words and numbers and perspective and things like that. And it's it's a classic for a reason. And Norton Juster, who's the author, died within the past year. It's very sad. He was old, so that happens. But I was still very sad. But this is just a really, I think it continues to be a really great book for any kid to read. And it's always got one of my favorite scenes, which is when he's in the land of words, and they're gonna have a feast, and he keeps suggesting meals, and they keep being more like, he suggests, why don't we have a square meal, because he's heard that that's a thing you're supposed to have, and they bring out a bunch of squares, and they're not very good, and then he suggests that they have a light meal, and they bring out plates that just emit these lights, and it's just very fun and makes you think about things in a different way. Gotta love The Phantom Tollbooth. All right, next up is Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh by Richard C. O'Brien, and here's my tattered copy that has the movie cover, which they title as The Secret of Nimh, because I think there was Frisbees became a thing between when this book came out, I think, and when they made the movie, so they changed her name to Frisby instead. But we've got this really beautiful, like, classic edition now. It's got nice little illustrations in it. It's very pretty. I like it. But so Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh. It's about Mrs. Frisby, who was a mouse, and her husband Jonathan died the summer before, and she's very sad. And she's got 4 little kids. And one day she sort of discovers that her husband Jonathan actually came from a lab, which is Nimh. And that her husband was one of 2 mice from this particular lab, but there was a whole bunch of rats who basically what happened in this lab is they became intelligent. And so she starts to make friends with the Rats of Nimh and starts to learn about their adventures and the society they're creating and their desire to be unrat-like, and that they don't, the nature of rats seems to be stealing, and they don't want to steal, they want to survive on their own, and so they're making these grand plans to move to a valley where they can farm and they can make their own food and they can have their own stuff and not be stealing from anyone. But first, they're still living on a farmer's land, and the farmer is pretty determined to get rid of them. So I don't want to say too much more without giving away in case you haven't read this book. I also quite loved the movie when I was a kid, and it's a very different, the movie is very different from the book. So if you've seen the movie and you never read the book, you should definitely read the book because it's very fun. All right, next up, Catherine Called Birdy by Karen Cushman. Here's my old copy, and here's a newer copy. I guess this one, the newer one, makes the book feel a little more serious than I feel like it is. I mean, it's essentially it takes place in like the 1200s, and a young girl, Catherine, is decided that she's going to keep a diary. You know, it's like one of her. Someone has recommended to her that she, try to improve her skills in observation, has recommended that she start keeping a daily diary. So it's historical fiction, but she's also, kind of a quirky, different girl. She really wants to do more than women are allowed to do in her society, and her father is very determined to marry her off to someone rich because, she is a lady, and that's what happens to women in that time period. And so, she undertakes a number of jokes and pranks to try to dissuade the suitors that her father is bringing her way in all sorts of fun shenanigans, but also, you get a lot of the flavor of the time, but in a very digestible way, since it is a kid's book, but it's a very fun read. All right, next up, these are not so much kids' books as, the books I read as a kid that weren't necessarily intended for kids. So, The Last Unicorn, and there's this, I quite like this. This is a very pretty edition of The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. This is another one that has a movie along with it that actually the movie is pretty spot on in many regards, except for Mia Farrow singing, but The Last Unicorn is, as the title suggests, the story of the last unicorn. So she is she's hanging out in a field, she's like in her woods, and she's doing what unicorns do, and she kind of overhears that these hunters kind of talking about how there's clearly a unicorn in these woods. We shouldn't hunt here, and they're leaving, and they basically say like she must be the last unicorn in all the land, and she can't quite believe it. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm a unicorn, like unicorns last forever. So she kind of corners a butterfly, and who's very flighty and hard to get information out of, but she learns the story from this butterfly that she supposedly is the last unicorn, that all the other unicorns were driven down the roads long ago by the Red Bull, and that they're in the land of King Haggard. And so she decides, like, I can't be the only unicorn left. I have to go and help my other unicorns. So she sets off on an adventure to attempt to find the other unicorns. And of course, many things happen to her along the way. She meets with a bumbling magician who's not very good at magic named Schmendrick, who's had a spell put on him, basically that he will essentially live forever until he finally figures out how to do magic. And, and Molly, and just, it's a really beautiful story, and it's got one of my favorite endings of all time. Just, I don't want to say more about it, but it's got one of my favorite endings, and it's one of my favorite books. Beautiful, fun story. Give it a try. All right, and last, but certainly not least, Sabriel. Here's my old copy, and here's this 25th Anniversary Classic Edition. It's in hardcover, and this is by Garth Nix. So this is the first book that he wrote. This is set in what's called the Old Kingdom. There's a number of other books in this series at this point, and actually a prequel, Terciel and Eleanor, is coming out, I think, in November of this year. So it's set before the events of Sabriel by 20 or so years. But in Sabriel is the story of Sabriel, who lives in a world where the landmass she lives on is divided into the North Kingdom and the South Kingdom. And in the South Kingdom, there's technology, and there's phones, and there's cars, and there's things like that. But in the North Kingdom, there is magic. And magic doesn't work in the South Kingdom, and technology doesn't work in the North Kingdom. And in the North Kingdom, they have a big problem with the dead. dead coming and attacking and killing people, and Porson, who is Sabriel's father, goes and puts the dead back to sleep. So he's sort of an anti-necromancer. And the story opens with Sabriel at, she's 18, she's getting ready to end her schooling. She's been going, she doesn't quite know why, but her father has made her go to school in the South Kingdom, very close to the wall, so you can still, there's a wall that divides the two kingdoms. She lives close to the wall, so she can still do magic, but, and then it begins basically with her father sending a figure to her with his bells, these bells that she's got on that she's wearing here. And so she knows that something horrible must have happened for him to send the bells away. So she sets off to return home and find her father. And I won't say more about it because there's lots of great surprises, and Sabriel is just a fantastic woman to be following. She's really strong and she's smart and she gets things done, but of course makes lots of mistakes along the way. So those are my books that I read all the time as a kid, and let me know in the comments what some of your books, what some of your favorite books were when you were a kid. And if you like what we're doing here, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and like this video. And thanks so much.